Do you really think silence can save you? The words sliced through the crisp night air as Clara Whitman stepped onto the marble floor of the ceremonial hall, her small frame swallowed by the vastness around her. Torches flickered along the walls, casting long shadows that danced across the faces of the gathered pack, each flame trembling in the cool October wind that seeped through the open arches. She pulled her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders, the wool scratching lightly against her skin, a constant reminder of the scarcity she had grown accustomed to. The scent of polished wood and burning torches mixed with the faint tang of wet leaves from outside, forming a sensory blanket that pressed against her senses. Her heart thumped unevenly, a drumbeat of nerves and determination, and she drew in a deep breath, tasting the smoke and cold air as if it could fortify her resolve. Around her, the pack members chattered softly, their whispers sharp and cutting, like the rustle of dead leaves underfoot, each comment a reminder of her perceived insignificance. She caught glimpses of young betas smirking, their eyes glinting with amusement as they nudged each other, a silent audience anticipating her failure. Clara's gaze dropped to the intricate patterns etched into the marble beneath her boots, the cool surface grounding her, reminding her that even amidst the derision, she retained control over her own posture, her own breath. A sudden ripple of laughter erupted from the far end of the hall as one of the higher-ranking betas, a tall figure with meticulously groomed hair, leaned forward and gestured toward her with exaggerated mockery. Clara flinched ever so slightly, but her feet remained rooted, and she lifted her chin just enough to meet the faintest glimmer of her own reflection in the polished floor. She was aware of every whisper, every glance, yet she refused to shrink further into herself, even as the weight of collective judgment pressed on her chest. A faint movement caught her eye, a younger Omega cowering near the edge of the hall, shoulders hunched, eyes wide with apprehension, and Clara instinctively shifted, planting herself in the small figure's path, her presence a quiet shield. The hall seemed to pulse with anticipation, the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from nearby stalls mingling with the colder air from the forest beyond, creating a sensory tension that wrapped around her. Every step she had taken to arrive here, every lesson in restraint and endurance, coalesced into a singular focus: to maintain her dignity, to exist in spite of the scorn that sought to diminish her. She could hear the faint creak of the great doors behind her, the distant shuffle of feet, and the rustle of ceremonial robes as other Omegas and Alphas adjusted themselves in the flickering torchlight. The ambient noise of murmurs and shifting stances became almost rhythmic, each beat synchronizing with the erratic flutter of her pulse. Clara's hands, delicate yet firm, rested lightly at her sides, fingers brushing the coarse fabric of her cloak, grounding her in the physical, in the moment. Her eyes scanned the hall in measured sweeps, noting the angles of pillars, the patterns of light and shadow, the subtle movements of the crowd, all in preparation, whether conscious or not, for whatever might come next. Somewhere near the back, a beta tried to provoke laughter, leaning close to his neighbor, gesturing toward Clara with an armful of rolled parchment, but she did not respond, did not acknowledge the bait. Silence became her armor, a quiet defiance that contrasted sharply with the murmuring amusement surrounding her. She felt the cool marble beneath her boots, the subtle vibrations of voices carried across the floor, the faint scent of smoke lingering in her nostrils, all merging into a heightened awareness of the ceremonial stage she occupied. Every whisper seemed amplified, every glance weighted with expectation, and yet Clara remained composed, her breathing steadying, the rhythm of inhale and exhale a counterpoint to the chaotic environment. She thought of nothing but the present, the tactile reality of stone beneath her, the gentle tug of her cloak, the distant hum of anticipation vibrating through the hall. The torchlight flickered again, elongating the shadows of her figure against the polished marble, and for a brief, suspended moment, she felt both minuscule and monumental, insignificant yet wholly present. Each heartbeat rang in her ears, loud and clear, a drum signaling her resilience. She could feel the weight of countless eyes upon her, the collective judgment pressing from all sides, yet she stood unmoving, the embodiment of quiet fortitude. Somewhere in the upper gallery, the soft rustle of silk indicated the approach of higher-ranking alphas, their attention turning slowly toward her, the faint metallic scent of ceremonial armor mingling with the air. Clara's jaw tightened imperceptibly, a small, private gesture of resolve, as she prepared to meet whatever spectacle awaited. The hall seemed to hold its breath with her, the flickering torchlight suspending time in a delicate balance between anticipation and revelation, each shadow a spectator, each breath a statement. In that suspended moment, Clara Whitman became more than the whispers and the mockery, more than the expectations or derision of the pack. She became the still point in the oscillating chaos, the silent force around which the evening's destiny would pivot. She inhaled one last time, the cold air sharp against her lungs, and let her shoulders settle, poised to transform silence into an unspoken declaration, ready for the first motion that would signal the beginning of a night that no one would forget. Clara Whitman adjusted the hem of her cloak, feeling the rough wool against her palms as she moved cautiously through the center of the ceremonial hall. The marble floor beneath her feet was smooth and cold, carrying the faint echo of footsteps from the surrounding pack members, a subtle reminder that every movement was observed. Torches along the walls flared gently as a draft swept through the open archways, their flames casting long, trembling shadows across the high ceiling. She could feel the eyes of dozens of individuals pressing against her from every angle, each glance a silent measurement of her worth, a quiet assessment that could have broken a lesser spirit. The hum of muted conversations rose and fell like the swell of waves, punctuated by occasional murmurs of amusement or disbelief, each one slicing into the air with subtle sharpness. Clara's chest rose and fell in measured breaths, each inhale bringing a mixture of anxiety and steadying resolve, each exhale grounding her more firmly in the present. She sensed a slight movement near the edge of the hall, a younger Omega shifting nervously, and instinctively, she shifted her own stance, creating a small barrier between the nervous figure and the attention of the more judgmental pack members. The hall itself felt alive, the polished marble reflecting torchlight and fractured patterns that danced across her face and cloak, painting her in alternating shades of gold and shadow. Every detail was heightened, from the distant clink of ceremonial attire to the faint rustle of fabric as other Omegas moved uncertainly in their allotted space. Clara's gaze swept deliberately across the room, noting the rigid postures of the Alphas, the subtle smirks of Betas who sought amusement in her discomfort, the quiet whispers that threaded through the air like invisible needles. Her hands remained at her sides, fingers brushing lightly against the wool, a tactile anchor in a sea of scrutiny. She could hear the faint shuffle of feet behind her as one of the Betas made a casual, exaggerated gesture toward her, drawing a ripple of stifled chuckles from a few onlookers, yet she remained poised, unmoving, the small act of standing still a declaration in itself. The scent of polished wood mingled with the faint tang of smoke and the crisp, earthy aroma drifting from outside, forming an atmosphere that felt simultaneously oppressive and sacred. Clara's senses were attuned to every micro-gesture, the slight lean of an Alpha's shoulder, the quick dart of a Beta's eyes, the subtle tension in the shoulders of Omegas nearby. Each observation strengthened her awareness and sharpened her internal focus, a mental preparation for whatever might come next. She felt a faint tightening in her stomach, a flutter of nerves tempered by a slow, deliberate deep breath, grounding herself in the reality of the present. The torchlight flickered once more, elongating the shadows around her and reflecting off the marble in patterns that made her appear both small and significant, a paradox she clung to in her mind. Clara noticed the soft movements of others shifting slightly as attention turned subtly toward her, though she did not yet understand why. She remained vigilant, scanning for any sign that the ceremony might advance in a manner that required her to respond. The distant murmur of conversation and the occasional scrape of shoes on marble formed a rhythmic undertone to the silence she cultivated around herself, creating a measured cadence that slowed time, each second stretching with palpable anticipation. Clara's shoulders relaxed incrementally as she recognized her ability to maintain composure, the simple act of remaining present becoming an exercise in silent strength. She felt the subtle warmth of torchlight on her face, the coolness of the marble beneath her feet, and the ever-present hum of observation, all combining into a heightened awareness of her surroundings. Every small sound, the whisper of fabric, the soft shuffle of distant feet, the rustle of the cloak of an approaching pack member, served as markers of the living space she occupied, a space both constraining and protective. Clara's mind was acutely aware of her breathing, each inhale drawing in the layered scents of the hall, each exhale a reminder of her inner steadiness. Her eyes moved slowly, deliberately, cataloging the posture and expressions of those around her, noting micro-expressions and subtle gestures that indicated intent, amusement, or disdain. The hall seemed to respond to her presence, shadows lengthening and receding, the polished marble reflecting her image in a fractured mosaic, a visual echo that reinforced her sense of presence and dignity. She adjusted her stance slightly, grounding herself with both feet firmly against the floor, her cloak settling naturally around her legs. Every nerve, every muscle, every measured breath contributed to an unspoken statement. She existed, she would not be diminished, and she would navigate the ceremony with the quiet resilience that had carried her through every trial prior to this moment. The faint sound of whispered names, the rustle of attire, and the distant flaring of torchlight created an environment that tested her focus. And yet, Clara Whitman remained centered, a quiet anchor amid the subtle storm of attention and expectation surrounding her. Clara Whitman moved carefully toward the raised platform at the center of the ceremonial hall, her steps measured and deliberate, the cool marble floor beneath her feet sending faint vibrations up through her legs with each movement. The torches along the walls flickered, casting an intricate pattern of light and shadow across the high vaulted ceiling, and the scent of burning pine mingled with the crisp autumn air drifting in from the open arches. Her eyes scanned the room cautiously, noting the positions of the alphas and betas arrayed around the periphery, their postures rigid and evaluative, their expressions a mixture of amusement and thinly veiled curiosity. A whisper traveled through the crowd like a soft breeze, carrying snippets of speculation and judgment, each word brushing against her consciousness and forcing her to steady her breath and remind herself of the composure she had cultivated. Clara's hands remained at her sides, fingers brushing the rough wool of her cloak, a tactile connection to the physical world grounding her in the present as the hum of anticipation filled the hall. The faint rustle of movement near the edges of the room suggested other Omegas shifting nervously, their eyes flicking toward her as if searching for guidance or reassurance. She gave no signal, no movement beyond the smallest tilt of her chin, yet she sensed the subtle acknowledgement of her presence among them, a quiet affirmation of her unspoken resolve. The hall itself seemed to vibrate with expectancy, the polished marble reflecting torchlight and fractured glimmers that danced across her cloak and the floor beneath her, making her appear both diminutive and significant, a paradox she held in silent stead. The distant murmur of voices rose and fell rhythmically, punctuated occasionally by a soft chuckle or an incredulous exhale, but Clara's focus remained on the space ahead, the central platform a beacon drawing her attention forward with an almost magnetic pull. She could feel the subtle weight of eyes from every angle, the combined pressure of judgment, curiosity, and anticipation pressing gently against her awareness, yet she remained unmoved, rooted firmly in her own poise. A beta shifted to block her path slightly, and she adjusted her stance with a quiet grace, a subtle assertion of space that did not invite conflict but maintained her presence unmistakably. The interplay of light and shadow on the walls shifted as the torches flared briefly, elongating her figure and casting an almost ethereal reflection across the marble, making her seem simultaneously grounded and elevated above the room's whispered chaos. Clara inhaled deeply, the scent of the smoke and cool air filling her lungs, a reminder of the hall's sacred energy and the ceremony's significance, and with each measured exhale, she let go of tension, allowing the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat to anchor her awareness. Her gaze lingered briefly on the intricate carvings etched into the platform, the symbols of tradition and authority stretching back generations, and she noted their angles and shadows, each one a reminder of the weight of history she was stepping into. The low, rhythmic creak of the wooden doors at the hall's entrance echoed faintly across the marble, blending with the hushed murmurs of observers adjusting their stances or shifting in anticipation, forming a subtle, layered background to her solitary focus. Clara felt a subtle surge of awareness as the movement of others, the shuffle of fabric, the slight tilt of heads, all threaded together to create a network of attention she could sense without directly seeing. Her breathing, steady and deliberate, became a silent metronome for the room, each inhale and exhale reinforcing her presence and her determination to remain composed. The flicker of torchlight on the vaulted ceiling seemed to mimic the rise and fall of her chest, the dancing shadows echoing the subtle tension of the gathering as every eye followed the ritual's progression. Clara's gaze remained fixed ahead, the contours of the platform and the shifting patterns of the onlookers forming a mental map she navigated with careful precision, noting angles, distances, and gestures, each one a subtle data point in her internal catalog. She adjusted her shoulders slightly, a small, controlled movement that aligned her posture with the measured rhythm of her breath, projecting quiet steadiness and inner strength despite the layers of scrutiny surrounding her. The hall felt simultaneously vast and intimate, every flicker of light and movement resonating with her senses, amplifying both the weight of expectation and the clarity of her resolve, until she stood fully aware of the space, poised and centered, a silent presence commanding acknowledgement without a single word spoken. The moment shifted subtly as the murmurs in the hall grew slightly sharper, a low ripple of amusement moving through the crowd, and Clara Whitman felt the weight of collective scrutiny pressing more firmly against her senses. The torchlight flickered across the vaulted ceiling, casting jagged shadows that moved in time with the rhythm of quiet laughter and whispers, each one a reminder of the subtle power dynamics that defined the ceremonial hall. Clara's gaze swept over the rows of alphas and betas, noting their rigid postures and the way some leaned forward slightly, anticipation gleaming in their eyes, their attention fixed on her like a magnetic pull she could not evade. She could hear the soft scrape of fabric as a beta shifted position, the faint click of polished boots against the marble, and even the gentle sigh of a distant observer adjusting their stance, all forming a symphony of minor movements that underscored the hall's tension. Clara's fingers brushed lightly against her cloak, feeling the coarse texture beneath her touch, a tactile reminder of the resilience she had honed over countless trials leading up to this moment. The air smelled faintly of pine and the earthy dampness from outside, mingled with the warm scent of burning torches, creating a layered environment of contrasts, both grounding and suffocating, that heightened her awareness. Across the hall, a younger Omega stumbled slightly, their gaze darting toward Clara, searching for reassurance or direction, and she shifted imperceptibly, standing just enough to create a protective presence without drawing overt attention. The polished marble beneath her boots reflected the torchlight in fractured patterns that danced across her cloak, her hands, and the floor around her, creating a visual rhythm that mirrored the subtle beats of anxiety and anticipation pulsing through her chest. She inhaled slowly, drawing in the crisp autumn air tinged with the scent of smoke, and exhaled just as deliberately, letting her breath anchor her mind in the present as the hall seemed to contract around her, the focus of every movement she observed sharpening with each passing moment. A faint ripple of laughter emerged from the far side of the platform, a soft but pointed indication of the crowd's reaction to her presence, and Clara held her posture unwavering, her shoulders squared and her chin slightly lifted, signaling quiet dignity amidst scrutiny. The subtle shift of torchlight made the shadows lengthen and bend, and for a fleeting instant, she appeared larger than her slight frame, a visual assertion of the silent strength she carried. Her eyes caught the careful, deliberate gestures of a high-ranking beta as they pointed toward her, an attempt to elicit reaction or amusement, yet Clara remained steadfast, allowing only the subtlest flicker of acknowledgement in her gaze, a silent communication of awareness and restraint. The distant hum of conversation, punctuated by faint exhalations of surprise or subtle murmurs of comment, layered the hall with a tension that seemed almost palpable, each micro-movement resonating across the marble floors in echoes that Clara absorbed fully, maintaining a calm vigilance. Her breathing remained measured, each inhale a deliberate act of grounding, each exhale a release of residual tension, reinforcing her presence as a steady point amid the chaotic currents of observation and judgment. Clara's feet remained firmly planted, her cloak settling naturally around her legs, the weight of its fabric a subtle reassurance against the intangible pressure of the room. She noted the smallest details, the tilt of an alpha's head, the shift of a beta's shoulders, the fleeting expressions of curiosity or amusement in the crowd, all catalogued silently, each serving to heighten her readiness for whatever movement or declaration might next unfold. The torchlight flickered again, elongating shadows across the high walls and reflecting off the polished marble, creating a mosaic of light and dark that seemed to pulse in harmony with her own steady heartbeat. Clara's awareness extended to the periphery of the hall, registering subtle gestures, the soft creak of doors, the almost imperceptible sound of garments brushing the floor, integrating each sensory input into a clear mental map of the space around her. She adjusted her stance slightly, the gentle pressure of marble beneath her boots anchoring her, reinforcing a sense of poise and presence that did not invite confrontation yet could not be ignored. Each careful, deliberate motion, each measured breath, each nuanced observation served to project a quiet command of space and attention, a silent declaration that despite the scrutiny and whispers, she existed fully and with resolve. The hall seemed to respond, the flicker of torchlight catching the edges of her cloak, the shadows dancing across the floor and walls in a subtle echo of her inner steadiness, as if the very architecture of the ceremonial space acknowledged her presence without a single word. Clara Whitman remained poised and centered, a quiet force against the currents of anticipation, embodying dignity and control in every subtle gesture, every deliberate breath, and every measured step. Clara Whitman felt a subtle shift within herself as she remained still, the weight of the room pressing on her senses in waves that were both tangible and intangible, a quiet pressure that made her acutely aware of the proximity of each observer and the intensity of their unspoken judgments. The polished marble beneath her feet reflected the flickering torchlight, creating patterns of gold and shadow that danced across her cloak and traced along the edges of the platform, lending her a presence that seemed larger than her slight frame. She noticed the faint movements of alphas and betas adjusting their postures, the way they leaned slightly forward or exchanged glances, a ripple of anticipation running through the hall, as though her stillness itself had drawn attention. Clara's breathing remained deliberate, each inhale and exhale a steadying rhythm that anchored her in the moment, allowing her mind to catalog the myriad details around her, the subtle crease in a beta's sleeve, the flicker of torchlight across an alpha's hair, the muted rustle of garments from the edges of the room. A soft whisper passed through the crowd, barely audible, but carrying a note of derision that brushed against her consciousness. And she responded not with words, but with the slightest tilt of her chin, a silent assertion of presence that contrasted sharply with the expectant murmurs. The air carried the mingled scents of pine, smoke, and polished wood, each inhalation heightening her awareness and sharpening her focus as the hall seemed to stretch and contract with the collective tension of onlookers. Clara's hands, lightly resting at her sides, brushed against the wool of her cloak, a grounding touch that reminded her of her resolve, each fingertip tracing the coarse texture as if to reaffirm her quiet strength. She observed the younger Omegas, some shifting nervously, others glancing toward her for unspoken cues, and Clara adjusted her stance minutely, creating a protective space with her body without a single spoken word, a gesture of unassuming command. The pattern of light and shadow shifted again as the torches flickered, elongating her figure across the polished floor and highlighting the contours of her posture, lending her a subtle authority in the midst of scrutiny. The distant rustle of movement from the hall's entrance and the soft click of boots against marble formed a backdrop of rhythm and expectation that Clara absorbed fully, her attention weaving seamlessly through the layers of sound, sight, and sensation surrounding her. Each subtle gesture from the crowd, the lean of a shoulder, the tilt of a head, the flicker of eyes, was cataloged in her mind, adding to the intricate map of social and spatial dynamics that she navigated silently. Clara inhaled once more, the cool air filling her lungs, the warmth of torchlight brushing her cheeks, and she exhaled slowly, feeling a quiet steadiness spread from her core outward, a calm amidst the swirling currents of observation. The hall seemed to hold its breath with her, the flickering reflections creating a mosaic of light and shadow that mirrored the composed tension in her body, each heartbeat resonating as a subtle drum beneath the surface of her awareness. Her gaze swept over the ceremonial platform and the rows of pack members with measured attention, noting micro-expressions and subtle shifts in posture, every detail reinforcing her sense of preparedness. Clara adjusted her feet slightly, grounding herself against the marble, and allowed the gentle weight of her cloak to settle naturally around her legs, the fabric a tactile reminder of her presence and poise. The collective whisper of anticipation, punctuated by soft shifts and minor movements, resonated through the hall like an underlying rhythm, each note emphasizing the stillness and quiet authority Clara projected without uttering a single word. She maintained her stance with meticulous care, shoulders squared, chin elevated just enough to project dignity, fingers lightly brushing the wool of her cloak, every detail a silent assertion of her resilience. The flickering torchlight painted the space in continuous motion, elongating and receding shadows, reflecting off the polished marble to create a living tapestry around her, one that moved in rhythm with the subtle cadences of her heartbeat and the silent intensity she radiated. Clara Whitman remained poised, alert, and fully present, a singular, quiet force in a hall alive with observation and expectation, embodying dignity, awareness, and silent strength in every measured breath, every subtle gesture, and every deliberate step she took within the ceremonial space. Clara Whitman took a careful step forward, her gaze lifting slightly to follow the faintly illuminated lines of the ceremonial platform, each torchlight reflecting subtly on the polished marble, creating a shimmering path that seemed to guide her movements. The hall was alive with quiet anticipation, the subtle hum of whispered conversations forming a soft undercurrent beneath the more deliberate shuffles of feet on marble. Clara could feel the subtle shift in air pressure as nearby alphas adjusted their stances, leaning slightly forward, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and measured evaluation, and she absorbed each nuance, committing the small details to memory while keeping her composure intact. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, fingertips brushing against the coarse wool of her cloak, the tactile sensation grounding her awareness as she moved with deliberate precision. She noticed a younger Omega shifting nervously at the edge of the hall, eyes flicking toward her as if seeking reassurance, and Clara adjusted ever so slightly, creating a protective presence without drawing overt attention. The flicker of torchlight caused shadows to stretch and retreat across the hall, highlighting her figure in a way that suggested both fragility and quiet resilience, a paradox that she embraced silently. The subtle scent of pine mixed with the warm notes of burning torches and the earthy aroma drifting from outside the open arches, forming a complex sensory tapestry that sharpened her focus and reinforced the solemnity of the ceremonial space. Clara's eyes traced the rows of observing pack members, noting micro-expressions, the slight tilt of heads, the subtle shifts in posture, and the faint glances exchanged among them, each movement a thread in the intricate social fabric of the hall. Her breathing remained slow and measured, each inhale and exhale reinforcing her calm center, allowing her to maintain poise despite the quiet tension surrounding her. A soft ripple of amusement passed through a group of betas, their attention drawn to the deliberate stillness she maintained, but she did not waver, allowing the silence itself to speak volumes as she navigated the charged atmosphere. The polished marble beneath her boots reflected the torchlight in a fractured mosaic, light and shadow dancing across the floor and her cloak, emphasizing her presence without a single word uttered. Clara sensed the subtle vibrations of movement from the entrance, the faint scrape of boots against stone, and the gentle rustle of garments as the assembly subtly shifted in response to her progress, all forming an ambient rhythm that heightened her senses. She adjusted her posture with meticulous care, shoulders squared, chin lifted just enough to project quiet confidence, fingers lightly brushing the fabric of her cloak in a grounding gesture that reinforced her inner strength. The ambient sounds, the soft exhalations of observers, the muted adjustments of robes, the subtle shuffle of distant feet, merged into a layered symphony, each note emphasizing her quiet authority in the midst of expectation. Clara's awareness extended to the far corners of the hall, noting the smallest gestures, the shifting weight of attention, the nuanced expressions that suggested amusement, curiosity, or admiration, all cataloged with silent precision. She drew in another slow breath, the crisp autumn air tinged with smoke filling her lungs, and exhaled deliberately, releasing residual tension, reinforcing a sense of centered composure that radiated subtly outward. The flickering torchlight continued to cast dynamic patterns across the high vaulted ceiling and marble floor, elongating shadows and emphasizing contours, echoing the controlled tension and deliberate stillness that Clara embodied. Each small adjustment, of feet, shoulders, gaze, or hand, served to reinforce the steady authority she projected, a silent testament to her inner resilience and the quiet power of her presence in the ceremonial hall. Clara Whitman remained poised, alert, and fully present, a measured force amidst anticipation, embodying composure, awareness, and unspoken confidence in every breath, every gesture, and every deliberate step she took across the polished marble, commanding attention without a word spoken. The ambient tension in the ceremonial hall grew subtly more pronounced as Clara Whitman maintained her measured stance, the polished marble beneath her boots reflecting the golden torchlight and fractured, shifting patterns that seemed to pulse with the quiet energy of the room. She sensed the subtle shift in the attention of the alphas and betas, a collective awareness moving toward her like a tide, each observer drawn by the poise she projected without a single word. The soft rustle of robes, the gentle tap of polished boots against stone, and the faint inhale of an intrigued onlooker created a symphony of ambient sounds that Clara absorbed fully, her mind cataloging every nuance with meticulous attention. A younger Omega near the edge of the hall shifted nervously, glancing toward Clara with eyes wide in curiosity and uncertainty, and she adjusted her stance slightly, creating a protective yet unobtrusive presence that radiated calm authority. The flickering torchlight cast elongated shadows that moved across the vaulted ceiling and walls, dancing in rhythm with the subtle motions of the crowd, highlighting the contours of Clara's cloak and the poised lines of her posture, reinforcing the quiet strength she embodied. The mingled scents of pine, warm smoke, and the faint earthy aroma drifting through the open arches formed a layered atmosphere, each inhalation sharpening her awareness and anchoring her further in the moment. Clara's hands remained lightly at her sides, fingertips brushing the rough wool of her cloak, a tactile reminder of the steadiness she had cultivated over countless trials, each micro-gesture reinforcing her silent resilience. She observed the soft gestures of the alphas, the subtle shifts in posture, the brief glances exchanged between betas, noting the undercurrent of anticipation that rippled through the room. The hall seemed to breathe around her, the polished marble and torchlight reflecting and amplifying her calm, deliberate presence, creating a visual harmony that held the attention of those around her without a single uttered word. Her breathing remained deliberate and even, each inhale drawing in the crisp autumn air mingled with the warmth of torches, each exhale releasing tension and reinforcing the quiet confidence that radiated from her frame. The subtle clicks, rustles, and quiet whispers of the gathered pack formed a rhythmic backdrop to her observations, allowing her to anticipate shifts in attention and movements before they occurred. Clara adjusted her feet slightly, grounding herself more firmly on the marble as the shadows lengthened across the floor, elongating her figure in a way that suggested both stillness and unspoken power. Her gaze swept deliberately across the ceremonial platform, noting angles, distances, and expressions, cataloging every minor detail without distraction, every small shift a potential cue to the unfolding dynamics of the room. The subtle warmth of torchlight brushed her cheeks, highlighting the calm determination in her expression, while the cool marble beneath her feet maintained a steady anchor, connecting her physically to the space. Clara sensed the collective energy of the room, a gentle, almost imperceptible push and pull of attention and expectation, and she allowed herself to exist fully within that current, poised and centered, letting the silence and stillness speak louder than words ever could. Every micro-gesture of her body, slight shifts in shoulders, the subtle lift of her chin, the gentle placement of her hands, reinforced the message she projected: composed, observant, quietly commanding. The hall continued to pulse with anticipation, shadows flickering and stretching in harmony with the subtle movements of observers. Yet Clara Whitman remained a fixed point, a quiet anchor of composure and awareness, fully present and unwavering amidst the swirl of attention and expectation. Each careful, deliberate breath, each measured movement, each observant glance contributed to an aura of silent authority that held the hall in a delicate balance. Every individual present drawn to her poise, her dignity, and the unspoken strength that radiated from her in absolute stillness. Clara Whitman felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere as the collective anticipation of the ceremonial hall intensified, the faint hum of murmured conversations rising and falling like gentle waves, each one brushing against her awareness and reinforcing the charged energy that enveloped the space. The polished marble beneath her boots reflected the flickering torchlight in fractured patterns, casting dynamic shadows that danced along the high vaulted ceiling and stretched across the walls, lending an almost ethereal quality to her presence. She noticed the slight movements of the alphas and betas, subtle shifts in posture, the careful tilt of heads, and the exchange of glances, all forming a delicate network of attention that centered upon her without a single word being spoken. Clara's breathing remained measured, each inhale drawing in the crisp autumn air mingled with the warmth of burning pine from the torches, each exhale releasing a gentle wave of steadiness that anchored her in the present. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, fingers brushing the coarse wool of her cloak, a tactile grounding that reinforced the quiet authority she projected. The younger Omegas near the periphery of the hall moved with hesitant, nervous energy, their eyes frequently darting toward her for unspoken guidance, and she adjusted her stance ever so slightly, creating a silent barrier that radiated reassurance without overt interference. The torchlight flickered once more, elongating shadows and highlighting the poised lines of her posture, emphasizing both the calm stillness and the subtle strength she embodied. The layered scents of pine, smoke, and the faint earthy aroma drifting from the open arches intertwined, forming a sensory backdrop that heightened her focus and reinforced the ceremonial gravity of the moment. Clara's eyes scanned the crowd with deliberate precision, noting the smallest gestures, the micro-adjustments of a beta's shoulders, the soft exhalation of curiosity from a distant observer, the subtle folding of hands among the assembled Omegas, all cataloged silently, enhancing her awareness of the intricate dynamics of the room. The soft rustle of robes, the gentle tap of boots, and the low murmurs of conversation formed a rhythm to which Clara attuned herself, each sound a cue in the unfolding pattern of attention and expectation. She adjusted her stance minutely, grounding her feet more firmly against the marble, allowing the fabric of her cloak to settle naturally around her legs, a small but deliberate act that reinforced her composure. The interplay of light and shadow continued to shift, the torch flames casting dynamic reflections on the polished marble that accentuated her presence without demanding notice, creating an almost hypnotic effect that drew the eyes of the assembly. Clara maintained her focus on the ceremonial platform, noting the subtle indicators of shifting attention, the micro-expressions of curiosity or mild amusement, and the deliberate gestures of those in higher ranks, all woven into the silent narrative of the hall. Each measured breath, each imperceptible adjustment of posture, each deliberate placement of hands contributed to a quiet, commanding presence, a statement of resilience and dignity in the midst of scrutiny. The hall seemed to resonate with her awareness, shadows elongating and receding in harmony with her controlled stillness, reflecting the subtle power of composure and inner focus. Clara Whitman remained fully present, poised and centered, a singular point of quiet strength and unwavering attention within the ceremonial space, her calm yet deliberate aura commanding notice without a single spoken word, the very air around her alive with the tension and expectation she navigated with meticulous care and unshakable poise. Clara Whitman felt the subtle tension in the hall deepen as the minutes stretched, the soft shuffle of feet, and the faint rustle of fabric creating an undercurrent of expectancy that threaded through the polished marble and torchlit walls. Every observer seemed attuned to the smallest motion, every whispered comment carrying a weight that brushed against her awareness, sharpening her senses and reinforcing the deliberate steadiness she projected. The torchlight flickered gently, elongating shadows across the vaulted ceiling and casting fractured reflections on the floor, her figure appearing both delicate and quietly formidable in the interplay of light and darkness. Clara's hands rested lightly at her sides, fingers brushing against the coarse texture of her cloak, a grounding connection to the physical world as her mind cataloged each micro-gesture and subtle glance among the alphas and betas surrounding her. A younger Omega, shifting nervously at the edge of the hall, glanced repeatedly toward her, the silent appeal for guidance met with a barely perceptible adjustment of Clara's posture, a small yet deliberate protective signal. The layered sense of smoke, burning pine, and the faint earthy aroma drifting from outside the open arches formed a complex sensory backdrop, each inhalation sharpening her awareness and reinforcing the gravity of the ceremonial moment. Clara's gaze swept slowly across the platform and the observing pack members, noting the subtle inflections in posture, the quick exchange of glances, the slight tilt of a head or soft exhalation, all cataloged silently, building a map of attention and expectation that she navigated without breaking her calm. The faint murmur of conversation and the occasional shifting of weight in the crowd created a rhythm that Clara absorbed, synchronizing her breath and movements with the ambient flow, maintaining poise and presence without a single overt gesture. The polished marble reflected torchlight in dynamic, fragmented patterns, highlighting the quiet lines of her posture and the deliberate steadiness of her stance, reinforcing her subtle authority and presence amidst the scrutiny. Clara's breathing remained slow and measured, each inhale drawing in the crisp autumn air mingled with warm torchlight, each exhale releasing tension and reinforcing the quiet composure that radiated from her frame. She noted the subtle micro-expressions, the faint widening of eyes, the small shifting of shoulders, the nuanced gestures that indicated curiosity, amusement, or quiet assessment, cataloging them with meticulous attention, building an intricate awareness of the room. The flickering torchlight continued to play across the hall, elongating shadows and casting fragmented reflections on the marble, creating a visual rhythm that mirrored the calm, deliberate intensity of her presence. Clara adjusted her feet ever so slightly, grounding herself more firmly, allowing the cloak to settle naturally around her legs, a tactile reinforcement of the poise she projected. The soft, layered sounds of whispers, rustling garments, and the gentle tap of boots formed a subtle symphony, underscoring her stillness and the magnetic pull of attention she commanded without words. Every careful, deliberate breath, every minor adjustment of posture, and every deliberate placement of her hands projected an aura of silent authority, a quiet strength that held the attention of all who observed her. Clara Whitman remained fully aware, alert, and centered, a singular presence of composed resilience and measured confidence, embodying quiet dignity and inner steadiness in the polished marble ceremonial hall, a fixed point around which the currents of expectation and attention flowed, her calm authority radiating silently and unmistakably to all who watched. The subtle shift in energy that Clara Whitman sensed moments before crystallized into a palpable presence as a figure emerged at the far end of the ceremonial hall, tall and commanding, his movements deliberate, each step carrying a weight that drew the attention of every onlooker. The polished marble beneath his boots reflected the torchlight in elongated streaks, casting a pattern of light and shadow that seemed to ripple across the hall, accentuating the gravity of the moment. Clara's gaze locked onto him instinctively, her pulse quickening slightly as the atmosphere thickened with the unspoken authority radiating from this new presence. Every whisper in the hall seemed to pause, as if the collective breath of the crowd had been momentarily held, the ambient hum of anticipation fading into a hushed reverence. The torchlight flickered, elongating shadows that stretched across the vaulted ceiling and walls, tracing the contours of the newcomer's form with a painterly precision, highlighting his broad shoulders and the deliberate rhythm of his movements. Clara adjusted her stance subtly, grounding herself against the cool marble beneath her boots, the tactile sensation reinforcing her focus and awareness as she prepared to meet whatever presence had arrived. The hall's scent shifted slightly, the mingling aroma of pine, burning torches, and the faint trace of leather from ceremonial attire combining to form a heady backdrop that sharpened her senses and demanded heightened attention. Her hands, lightly resting at her sides, brushed against the rough wool of her cloak, each subtle movement a reinforcement of her poised composure. The onlookers, previously murmuring and shifting in anticipation, now seemed suspended, their subtle gestures frozen in time as they absorbed the arrival of the commanding figure, their attention magnetically drawn to his measured steps. Clara noted the minor adjustments in posture across the assembly, the brief tilt of heads, the exchange of glances, all catalogued with meticulous attention as her awareness expanded to encompass every subtle detail in the room. The flicker of torchlight created a dynamic interplay of shadows on the marble floor and vaulted walls, elongating and retreating with each step, each motion a visual echo that mirrored the rhythm of the newcomer's presence. Clara's breathing remained controlled, each inhale drawing in the crisp autumn air and subtle warmth of torchlight, each exhale releasing residual tension while reinforcing the steady composure she projected. She observed the fine nuances in the movements of the alphas and betas near the platform, the slight straightening of backs, the minuscule narrowing of eyes, the almost imperceptible intake of breath, all responding instinctively to the weight of authority now manifest in the hall. Her gaze shifted carefully across the ceremonial platform, noting the polished carvings and the intricate lines etched into the stone, symbols of tradition and power that seemed to resonate with the presence now entering the space. Clara's subtle posture adjustments, the gentle tilt of her chin, the grounding of her feet against marble, all spoke silently of readiness and awareness, the quiet power of her composure acting as a counterbalance to the commanding presence approaching. The ambient sounds, the soft swish of robes, the faint tap of boots, the gentle intake of collective breath, formed a layered tapestry of perception that Clara absorbed fully, integrating each cue into her awareness while maintaining her silent poise. The torchlight flickered again, highlighting the contours of her own figure and reinforcing the tension of the hall, the shadows dancing in time with the deliberate, measured movement of the newcomer. Clara Whitman remained centered, fully present, her senses attuned to every micro-gesture, every subtle shift in attention, and every fragment of sound, embodying composure, quiet authority, and unwavering awareness as the hall seemed to bend subtly to the gravity of the moment, every eye drawn to the intersection of poised stillness and commanding presence in the ceremonial space. Clara Whitman felt the presence of the commanding figure draw ever closer, the polished marble of the ceremonial hall reflecting elongated streaks of torchlight that flickered across his form as each deliberate step brought him nearer to the platform. The ambient murmur of the crowd quieted, a collective inhalation holding the room in suspended anticipation, the subtle energy of the assembly shifting and bending toward him with unspoken recognition of his authority. Clara's gaze remained fixed, a mixture of focus and curiosity threading through her steady composure as she observed the way the torchlight caught the angles of his face, highlighting the sharpness of his jaw and the deliberate intensity in his eyes, which scanned the hall with precise attention, acknowledging nothing and no one else but the space ahead. The distant rustle of garments, the soft scrape of boots against polished marble, and the faint inhalation of observers created a rhythm that Clara absorbed, each sound sharpening her awareness and reinforcing her poised readiness. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, brushing against the coarse wool of her cloak, the tactile sensation grounding her as she remained perfectly still, a silent anchor within the charged atmosphere. The shadows across the high vaulted ceiling stretched and retreated in accordance with the flickering torches, casting dynamic patterns that highlighted both the formality and tension of the ceremonial space. Clara's breathing was deliberate, each measured inhale drawing in the crisp autumn air mingled with the faint warmth of torch flames, each slow exhale releasing residual tension and reinforcing the quiet steadiness she embodied. She noted the smallest details, the slight lean of a beta's shoulder, the subtle narrowing of an alpha's gaze, the muted shifts of the crowd in response to the measured cadence of his approach, cataloging each gesture and micro-expression with meticulous attention. The polished marble beneath her boots seemed to echo the rhythm of the approaching figure, the reflections stretching and breaking with each deliberate movement, visually amplifying the gravity of the moment. Clara's posture remained impeccably composed, shoulders squared, chin elevated just enough to convey quiet confidence, her presence a counterpoint to the silent authority now entering the hall. The combined sense of pine, smoke, and the earthy notes drifting from outside formed a layered sensory environment that heightened her awareness, grounding her focus as every subtle shift in the crowd's attention registered in her consciousness. She subtly adjusted her stance, grounding her feet more firmly, allowing the heavy folds of her cloak to settle naturally, a tactile reinforcement of poise and quiet strength. Each breath, each calculated glance, and every measured observation projected an aura of controlled composure, the unspoken language of confidence and quiet resilience speaking louder than words as the hall seemed to respond to the convergence of presence and attention. The flickering torchlight continued to create dynamic contrasts of shadow and illumination, reflecting the silent tension in the air and emphasizing the deliberate stillness that Clara maintained. Every nuance, from the subtlest shift of her hands to the precise control of her gaze, reinforced her awareness and readiness, a steady projection of dignity and unspoken authority that captivated the observers around her. Clara Whitman remained fully present, poised, and unflinchingly aware, her calm focus radiating silently across the ceremonial hall as every micro-gesture and subtle detail of her environment coalesced into a singular sense of command, her composure a quiet, undeniable force in the midst of anticipation and scrutiny. The hall seemed to exhale as Clara Whitman maintained her still, composed posture, the polished marble beneath her boots reflecting flickers of torchlight that stretched across the walls and vaulted ceiling, painting dynamic patterns of gold and shadow around her. Every eye in the room was drawn toward the convergence of her quiet presence and the commanding figure who now stood, fully revealed at the center of the platform, the subtle rhythm of anticipation threading through the assembly like a tangible current. Clara's breathing remained deliberate, each inhale drawing in the crisp autumn air mixed with the warm, resinous scent of burning pine, each exhale reinforcing the calm strength radiating from her form. She felt the ambient energy of the hall shift as attention sharpened, every micro-gesture of the alphas, betas, and fellow omegas cataloged in her awareness, the tilt of a head, the soft adjustment of a sleeve, the faint glimmer of surprise or curiosity in a glance, all woven into an intricate mental map of observation. The torchlight flickered, casting fractured reflections across the polished marble, the shadows elongating and retreating in time with the subtle movement of figures around the platform, highlighting the poised lines of Clara's stance and the precise stillness she maintained. Her hands, lightly brushing the wool of her cloak, remained steady at her sides, a tactile grounding as she absorbed the nuanced tension and quiet focus that saturated the room. A faint ripple of breath passed through the assembly, the soft shuffle of feet, the gentle rustle of garments, and the low murmur of observation combining into a layered rhythm that emphasized the singularity of her presence and the measured gravity of the moment. Clara's gaze swept the ceremonial hall with meticulous care, noting subtle expressions, minor shifts in posture, and the quiet movements of those in higher ranks, all contributing to the unfolding narrative of attention and expectation she navigated silently. The interplay of light and shadow continued to dance across the high walls and marble floors, creating a visual pulse that mirrored the steady cadence of her composure, the flickering torchlight reflecting the tension and significance held within the room. Clara adjusted her stance imperceptibly, grounding her feet more firmly against the smooth marble, allowing the folds of her cloak to settle naturally, each micro-gesture reinforcing her quiet authority and unspoken command of space. The sense of smoke, pine, and the faint earthy aroma from outside mingled, forming a complex sensory backdrop that heightened her perception, sharpening her awareness of every subtle cue and gesture in the hall. Her attention extended to the peripheral movements of the assembly, cataloging each micro-expression, each slight adjustment of posture, each small exhalation, and incorporating them seamlessly into her internal map of the room. Every careful, deliberate breath, every imperceptible shift of weight, every controlled movement of her hands contributed to the aura of composure and measured presence she projected. The hall seemed to respond, the torchlight elongating shadows and creating fractured reflections that accentuated her poise and silent strength, reinforcing the tension of the space and the anticipation of the assembly. Clara Whitman remained fully centered, poised, and vigilant, her awareness stretching to every corner of the ceremonial hall, the convergence of light, sound, and shadow amplifying her quiet, resolute presence. Each breath, each gaze, each controlled gesture reinforced the narrative of dignity and inner strength she embodied, a focal point of calm authority in the midst of expectation and scrutiny, silently commanding acknowledgement from all who observed her in the polished, torchlit ceremonial hall. The torchlight in the ceremonial hall flickered gently as Clara Whitman exhaled slowly, her posture unwavering, grounding herself against the polished marble beneath her boots while absorbing the subtle shift in the collective energy of the assembly. Every observer's gaze seemed to converge upon her, the measured rhythm of anticipation carrying through the hall like a tangible current, blending with the soft rustle of robes and the faint shuffle of feet that punctuated the otherwise hushed space. The polished surfaces reflected flickers of golden light that danced across her cloak, emphasizing the deliberate stillness and quiet authority she embodied, creating a visual harmony that seemed to hold the hall in suspended attention. Clara's breathing remained steady, each inhale drawing in the crisp autumn air tinged with the warmth of torches and the faint scent of pine from the open arches, each exhale, releasing tension while reinforcing the calm, poised energy that radiated from her frame. She noticed the subtle gestures among the alphas and betas, the micro-adjustments of posture, the brief exchange of glances, and the slight shifts of feet, all cataloged silently, forming a detailed mental map of the dynamics in the room. The young Omegas near the periphery shifted uneasily, glancing at Clara as if seeking reassurance, and she subtly repositioned herself, a gentle, unobtrusive act of protection that conveyed calm and confidence without words. Shadows stretched and retreated along the vaulted ceiling and walls as the torchlight flickered, highlighting the contours of her posture and the poised lines of her cloak, accentuating the quiet resilience she had cultivated over countless trials. Clara's eyes swept the ceremonial platform with deliberate precision, noting the intricate carvings and polished edges, each detail reinforcing the solemnity of the moment and the weight of tradition surrounding her presence. The murmured conversations, soft exhalations, and faint shuffling of the crowd formed a layered rhythm, a subtle symphony of anticipation that Clara integrated into her awareness, maintaining perfect composure in the midst of it all. She allowed her breathing to synchronize with the ambient pulse of the hall, each inhale drawing focus and clarity, each exhale releasing residual tension, a steady cadence that projected quiet authority without a single gesture or word. The torchlight flickered again, elongating shadows and creating fractured reflections on the marble floor, amplifying the tension and significance of the moment, while reinforcing the visual impact of her poised stillness. Clara adjusted her stance ever so slightly, grounding her feet firmly against the marble, letting the folds of her cloak settle naturally, each micro-movement a reinforcement of her calm presence and silent strength.